Hey everybody, welcome to the Digging Through the Archives and Managing Your Research Mess session. I saw there was some chatter in the chat about the ballad that we were just segueing with, and so it's super excited to see everybody loving that. And I saw there was a quick comment about Anne writing it. So quick background on that. You can go to the Summit website and actually see the background information on that. But the cool thing is that Mariana actually did ask Anne if she would write her a ballad for a ball she was going to. And so the lyrics that you see are Anne's actual words. And then, but she pulled the tune from an old soldier ballad that they used to whistle about Brighton, actually, when it had a different name. So very cool background information. You can go check that out on the Summit website. But thank you, everybody, for joining this. So the idea for this session kind of came about from the fact that all of us are here for 3 days talking about the research around Anne Lister and everything in her life and all the people in her life. And so there was like lots of conversations where people were saying, well, I'm not, doing anything or finding anything or looking for anything in the archives. And so we thought, well, maybe some people just don't realize how easy it is, or get really overwhelmed with the number of archives and the amount of options out there. So so we put this session together sort of as a very relaxed show and tell session. So we're going to go through some like pointers and tips on pretty much navigating all of the archives that are out there. And then we're going to share some of our actual like things that we do to keep it organized. Because any of you that have been down a rabbit hole of Anne Lister information, or sometimes people refer to it as an Anne hole, then you find out that you end up with a lot of documents and a lot of random screenshots or links to books, and they can just end up all over the place. And so I know for me, that's how it started. And at one point I was like remembering things I had read about Mariana, and then realizing that I couldn't find anything that I had previously found. So I was like, I've got to figure out how to do this. So that's how this session today was born. And so Marlene and Pauline and I spend a lot of time in archives. We've both been there in person and also online. So we were going to share some of our stories and give you some tips and tricks on how to get all of that started. And so to get us started, I'm going to go ahead and let Marlene and Pauline introduce themselves and kind of share just a little bit of their background. So Marlene, if you want to kick off with that introduction.
Hi, my name is Marlene Oliveira. I'm from Portugal, and I'm a code breaker and a contributor to Pact with Potential. So this has been a fun year. We started playing with diaries, and then we moved to the next level, playing with papers and digging for more. So, well, it's a process.
Definitely. Okay. Thanks, Marlene. Pauline, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and share some of your story background?
Yes. So I'm French, and I've been doing research for a few months now, almost a year. At first, Marlene contacted me because she needed help to get a document in a French archive. So I had never done that before. I didn't even know how to do that, but I didn't hesitate 1 second. I knew I wanted to help. It was very exciting to think about finding a document related to Anne in her life. And then after that, I have done mostly research online, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But that's okay. I think it's part of the game. Sometimes you won't find what you're looking for, but that's okay. And sometimes I do some research for people, to help people with French archive, mostly church records for birth and death certificates. Some people can't read French, so I just help them with that. And that's it.
Awesome. And in fact, one of my favorite stories with Pauline was I woke up one morning to a message asking if I wanted to jump on Zoom because she'd found something in the archives. And this was before Pauline and I had ever really interacted. And she said it had to do with Mariana. And so, of course, I jumped up and joined her. And that's when she had just, I think accidentally, right, stumbled across Mariana's christening records that indicated her birthday. And so that's how we were able to definitively find out Mariana's actual birthday. So that was a super exciting day. So yeah. I'm going to go ahead and share our presentation to get this started. We have just a little bit of background stuff to go through. Okay, so as I said, so this is the digging through the archives and how to manage your research mess. And both of those definitely go hand in hand. So we thought it was a perfect pairing. So to start, obviously, so there are a lot of archives. In fact, I think with in the UK as of like 2009, there were 600 and some actual archives, and then like 1,200 personal archives or private archives. So the idea that any one of these people that were researching an Enlister's life could have something in one of those places, there really is an endless opportunity for all of these archives across the UK to be able to find something. So that was exciting to see that list. So one of the things about the archives and the number of archives is that when you start, so all of them are different, right? You've got archives from like geographical areas, you've got some university archives, you have some city archives, but then they overlap with other areas and their archives. You've got the national archives. And these are just like the UK archives that I've had experience with. And so, of course, I've spent a lot of time in the Cheshire archives. And so these are going to be some screenshots of what the different archives look like. And so when I know when I first started, one of the biggest things was just trying to figure out how to navigate all of these different websites and the way they're set up. And if anybody who has been to the Halifax archives or the website, and they use Calm View, a lot of the archives use that. So the good thing is that if you do decide to like start exploring and you have experience with Calm View, that is a system used by many archives. So whether you love it or hate it, it's there. But so you've got places like Cheshire or of course Yorkshire archives. You've got the national archives that have their own setup. You've got places, of course, you know, the West Yorkshire archives, and then places like York. And one of the screenshots I didn't share here was like the Borthwick archives in York, which I found lots of Mariana and Belcom information from there. So there really is an archive. Like we could all take a handful of archives, like all of us, and still not be able to get through all of the information that exists and that's there. So that's exciting. So when it comes to archives like Pauline or Marlene, I know Pauline, you talked about being in the French archives a lot. Is that similar to this setup where there's all sorts of archives all over the place that you have to sort through?
Yes, it's the same in France. You have plenty of websites.
Yeah.
Depends on the location. I think we have the National Archives, and then every area has its own archive, just like you said.
Nice. Okay. So the one of the other things, so not only of course do they all have different systems, but then they have all sorts of different ways of actually, like, once you search and all the different filters. And so one of the tips that took me forever to figure out was that a lot of times, because the way some of these are digitized, or like people going in and actually hand entering the information, sometimes there's misspellings. So when you're going through and looking through the archives, right, and you get to their catalog, for me, and then, you know, I'll use my example with my experience. So like, of course, Belcom is always my go-to. And there'll be lots of times where I'll find nothing, but then if you put in some different spellings of that, you'll actually get some hits when it actually was the Belcom. So like I found the Balcoms because they spelled it with an A instead of an E, or I found it with the B missing, things like that. So when you go to these different archives and you start to search and you're looking for the different people or names or places or whatever you might be looking for, just because something doesn't pop up with that first entry, you know, think of all the different ways it could be spelled and then start with that. And then you've always got all the different filters and stuff. So I start with the name first, and then do different aspects of the spelling, and then go with the filters from there if I find any hits. Because one of the things for me when it comes to looking for Belcoms, so there's also a Belcom court that exists in the UK that has several hundred records in multiple archives that have to do with a house that has nothing to do with my research, but it comes up all the time across all of these. And so I end up having to read through and realize that, okay, nope, that's the house, and removing that. So obviously also when it comes to stuff like that, it does take a long time. So definitely when you decide to start looking for things, know that, you know, it's not, looking through the archives is not as easy as like doing a Google search, I will say. So just always know that you've got some time that you'll need to spend going through each of these and actually like probably doing some deep dives and stuff. So Marlene, I know you've done a lot of digging with all of your Ann Walker research. So like, what are the things that you've come across that that you've run into that are hurdles and stumbling blocks?
Well, the funniest one are what I like to call strays, which are papers that should not be on those bundles or connected to a certain thing. But then you start to go through the papers and then you realize that that paper accidentally got there somehow, or it's connected to some legal case. Sometimes stuff in legal cases doesn't make sense when you look at them at face value. Sometimes when you need newspaper articles to date something or a specific event, we run into that problem of the names being misspelled. Sometimes there are documents that have actual flaws that make it harder to read, like blotches of ink, or corners cut, or some letters are like ripped off, with parts ripped off. Even in the diaries, there are some pages missing here and there, and that could be a problem if you are interested in the content of that those pages should cover. But usually it's more a problem of knowing what makes sense and what doesn't. Recently I was going over some papers I've collected in maybe March, I think, and I realized that I had overlooked stuff that was relevant to other stuff I was looking at. So those are nice surprises.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, and so you brought up, so like the idea of the newspapers, so, you know, I always think of those as separate than the actual archives, but it's like that same search process. And a lot of the times when I've been looking for different things, whether it was Lawton information or Belcom information, sometimes it's as simple as like running across a newspaper article where, say, Mariana Lawton was mentioned, right? And there might be somebody else mentioned in that article with her that she did something with. And so I'll actually go and start looking for information on that person, because you never know when you can stumble across something that is, you know, connected, like you said, Marlene, that had nothing to do with it, but it's like a gem.
Yeah, to me, it's everything is like the web of information, and there are links connecting each part. For example, I might be looking into something from an lister's life, and suddenly there's a connection to someone else, or to some event, or to some specific place she visited, or with some war, or stuff like that. And well, it's hard not to say I'm not going to look into that, because you always get tempted to look into that. But when you're at the archive and you are pressed for time, or you are gathering references, obviously you cannot show up with like 200 references you want to see over a day or so. I mean, you have to cut on stuff. That's when you have to prioritize, and that's when it's the hardest part for me, because I like everything and I want to know more about everything, but I don't have time for that. So I have to choose. Sometimes I have to cut bits I don't necessarily should be cutting, but I'm pressed for time, so it happens.
Oh yeah, yeah. And then, so another thing that happens like with the archives, and so not only does often are we pressed for time, but for people who don't live near the archives, right? A lot of times we have to go in, and when we find something, you actually have to order copies. Sometimes if you're lucky, you might know somebody who can go take some pictures for you. But one of the revenue streams for the archives is charging people for the copies, right? So if you find something, for example, like the Francis Edward Bellcombe papers here that I found. So I wanted to order copies. And so each archive, when you're going in and finding these, each archive has sort of a different way of how they either want you to order or let you order. Some archives will let you order digitally, which is great, but there's not very many of those. So a lot of it is very manual emails back and forth. So when you're doing this research, just always be aware that when you do find things, like you'll also need to make sure you find out how you can order it, because it's not always very straightforward. Some of the websites are either handled by volunteers, or some of the archives are short-staffed. So you have to do a little digging sometimes on how you can order items. But typically it's done, at least through all the archives I've looked through, typically it's done through email. You'll send them your list of items that you find. And so what I do is I just take a screenshot of like the column view chart that comes up with all your options, and then send that to them. And then they will price out what you want. So one of the other things to keep in mind when you are ordering things, if they can make a copy, that's usually cheaper. But if they have to bring in a photographer to actually take pictures of the items due to like wear and tear or age, or conservation issues, then that adds charges too. So be aware. One of the things that's always a good idea is to go in with a budget just in case, because some of these documents, which I don't know how many of you have like read some of these wills and stuff, but some of these documents have about 10,000 extra words that they don't need, but they like to use big words and they like to use multiple of them. So you could get like a document that could be summed up in 2 paragraphs that's like 15 pages. And if the photographer has to take a picture, and if they charge, £3 or $3 a page, and you have multiple sets of these, it can add up. So just something to be aware, so that you don't get, sticker shock when you go. It can get expensive when you're ordering copies. So just, keep that in mind as you go. But if you're lucky enough to be at the archives in person, then definitely go, because then you can request those items. But like Marlena said, try not to ask them for 200. Keep it whatever number, is. Some of them state their limits. You can actually find like how many you can order at one time and things like that. But when it does come to digging in the archives, definitely it can take just as much time to find out everything you need to do with the archives as it does like actually finding your stuff. But the cool thing is that all of these archives are there for us to use. and for us to order items from and for us to search through. So, you know, I know sometimes it can be overwhelming and daunting, but don't ever be afraid to just dive in and just like spend as much time as you want putting all sorts of random keywords, because you never know when you're going to come across that gem that you had, that nobody knew was connected to one of the people that you're looking for. And then, you know, there you have it. Okay, so for that, that on the archives, I'm going to go ahead and pause that screen share, stop the screen share, and see if there's any questions on the actual archives before we dig into like some of the tools that we use to stay organized with the amount of stuff. If you want to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself. Wow, there's a long list. I don't see any hands yet. Okay. Excellent. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the tools. Okay, so one of the things, like I said in the beginning, that I found was that I ended up with all sorts of documents and pictures and copies and PDFs that I couldn't keep organized. So I had to figure out a way to do that because there's everything. I mean, it covers the whole gamut. So you've got like, you know, links to Google eBooks and the stuff from the archives. And so we're going to share some ways that we stay organized when it comes to this massive amount of information out there. So first, for me, I just wanted to share like the cloud storage and collaboration tools that I use. So my go-to is Google, because that houses all of my pictures. It's free. You can, you know, of course, you've got Google Slides and Docs and Sheets, which I use as part of my organizational process that I'll show you after this. But Google Drive and then Microsoft OneDrive are like my two go-to places because I've got, I guess they would call it like double redundancy when it comes to backing up. So I use Google Drive as my primary. Everything gets backed up there. And then I also back that up to OneDrive because there are some apps and stuff out there that just sync better with OneDrive. So those are my two tools that I use to keep all of this stuff together and try to keep some sort of sanity about it. And we can share those links in the chat if anybody wants to venture out and hasn't set things up like that before. So from that, now we'll go into like kind of sharing how we organize our files. This is one of Marlene's pieces that she uses. So I'm going to hand this over to Marlene so that she can talk about what she does.
Okay, so this spreadsheet, look, another spreadsheet. This one is a very basic version of what I used when I went to the archive. I had obviously sent them my list of things, but then I had a copy for myself with observations. As you can see, I was looking at Veer Hobart's jokes, which are not perfect, but well, we'll handle it. And then I use a color code to be able to tell at a glance what is higher priority and what isn't. For example, the red ones are the items I absolutely do not want to miss. And the gray ones are the ones I am willing to let slide if I don't have enough time. So I request everything on my list. Obviously, it is not a monster of a list, but I confess that when I got there, people thought, oh my God, this person is insane. She will not have time to go over all this. But I did have time to go over all that because I had already gone past the initial shock of, oh my God, I'm holding these papers. So my focus was more like, I have stuff to do, focus, and get what you need. And after that, you're done. So what I would advise is you send your list and then make a copy, color code it as it suits you, and ensure that every time you either copy or read the document, just cross it off the list and prioritize, because some items might be more important to what you are researching and others are not. So if you spend some time on the higher priority ones, it's definitely not a bad idea.
Yeah, definitely when it comes to prioritization. Because there was one time, so I did find some Belcom documents from Mariana's nephew, and it was some random, I had not prioritized, and it was a random like lawsuit that had nothing to do with, after I got it, had nothing to do with anything, but it was like 40 pages. And of course they had to photograph the whole thing. And so because I didn't prioritize, yeah, I got 40 pages of pictures that I had to pay for that didn't really give me what I needed. So, but in the end, you know, it's good that we are slowly getting all this stuff. So, so one of the, when it comes to spreadsheets, so hopefully everybody here loves them, because we do, and there's all sorts of things you can do with them. And so one of the ways that I use spreadsheets for organizing this stuff is very similar to Marlene's. So I keep track of everything that I order from all of the archives in different sheets in my research collection. And what I'll do is, once, you know, I'll keep track of whether I've received a copy or not. If it's some like letters that I might have blogged, I keep track of that. And then I'm also tracking down whether it's a transcription that I did or somebody else did. I keep track of those links. And then because I use Google Photos and stuff, then when I do take pictures or I get pictures of these items, then I actually link it to those pictures. So that way, as this information comes in, like I'm not losing, because what would happen in the beginning is I would get all these documents, I would get the pictures, and then they would be sitting in different places, and then I'd have to go through and spend a half hour looking for everything and still couldn't find things. So using Google Sheets, or if you use, you know, Office using Excel, I just keep track of everything I've ordered from the archives. That way I don't also accidentally reorder it, and then go in and just add the links for where those items lie. So some of them will be on OneDrive, and I'll just include the link there. So that way, like, you know, if I'm trying to find something or in conversation, it's like, oh, was there a letter that Mariana talked about this? I can just easily jump in here, do some keyword searches, and then I've also got it linked to the images. The big thing is, like I said, it helps you keep track of what you have ordered if you end up ordering several items, so you don't reorder. One of the things, so like I said, I also use OneDrive, and I know like all sorts of people, there's different methods. Like you might keep track of everything by subject, but I've got everything organized by person. And so as I get information randomly, screenshots, whatever it might be, I just dump it into their folder. And then when I have the time to go and update my spreadsheets, I'll come in and pull like the most recent items that I've added to the folder, link it out to, you know, the links, and then add any sort of descriptions and stuff. And then the other item that I use that is really helpful, because I use Office and OneDrive, I also use Microsoft OneNote, which syncs really well with a lot of different apps and tools. And so here, whether it's like screenshots or links or whatever it might be, this is another place where I'll do my initial dump, because it's really easy to add items to. So I'll do a dump here, and then when I have time, I'll go back and add it to my spreadsheet as needed. But being able to dump things, like your first initial, when you're finding things, having a place to dump it is really good, as long as hopefully you'll have the time at some other point to like actually start to organize it. But this has saved me a lot of time, which I was wasting in the beginning of trying to look through things. And so however you set it up, because right, this is just us kind of sharing how we are doing it, but there is no right or wrong way. It's just, these are some tools that are really helpful, so you don't get overwhelmed and lose stuff. I want to make sure that we've got some time for questions at the end. So this next session the part will go pretty quick. It's just the copyrights part I wanted to cover. So one of the things that when you are ordering documents from the archives, right, the archives still own the copyright to these. What you're doing is paying for a copy of them to use as your personal research and not to share. So every single document that I've ordered from all of the archives come with these copyright declarations that you have to sign and date and send back to them, saying that, you know, in so many words, that what you're doing is getting copies for your own personal research. And so if you want to be able to share images and so forth, you actually have to get permission to do that. And so I know sometimes that's kind of confusing, especially since there are some archives that provide the items that you can automatically see. Some you have to pay to order them. So, and I know all the archives have different ways of doing it, but the archives that I have ordered from in the UK have all come with this copyright declaration saying that if you are going to order these copies, this is just for you, do not share them. Because one of their other goals is that if somebody else needs a copy, right, they would pay for it, which then of course helps the archives, at least hopefully. So just something to always remember, that when you're ordering things, just always be respectful and aware of the archive copyright rules, because it's easy to forget those. And you know, I mean, we're all here, right, to share this information, and so we get really excited and we want everybody to see this stuff, but being respectful and following the copyright rules is super important. And that's why when they're transcribed, then we can share them, right? So like the letters that I have for Mariana, I'll transcribe those and then I can share those words. I just can't share the actual images without getting actual permission from the archives. So to end that, so like I said, there's no right or wrong way to do research. And also the term research doesn't have to be scary. One of the things we realized when we started this was that when we were asking people to participate, a lot of people would be like, oh, I don't do research. You know, I have nothing to share for this summit. But I mean, technically, when it comes down to like this type of research, anybody can do it, whether you're reading books about it, whether you might not even be reading about Anne Lister, maybe you're reading about cooking methods in 1820. But guess what? Anne Lister writes what she eats. And so that sort of research is helpful in this context because you're, you know, being able to share and things like that. So don't ever be afraid of the word research. All of us can research. All of us can do it. All of us can find this information. But in order for us to all share it, the best part is to stay organized. And who doesn't love spreadsheets? So that is that with that. So yes, we've got the stay in touch for me and Marlene and Pauline. And if anybody wants any help with their maybe their research mess or wants you know, whatever they might want help with on researching, feel free to reach out to any of us. And before we take some questions for the Q&A, Pauline or Marlene, did you guys have anything to add to that?
Well, on the topic of organizing research, when you come back from the archive, sometimes you have a big dump of information and you need to look at that pile of material and decide how to catalog that. So keep in mind that that's a lengthy process. Takes some time to figure out what to do with transcripts and papers and all that stuff. So everyone has a method. Mine was sort of borrowed from a suggestion from Livia, which is using the archive and the reference name and a small description and the date. That way I look at what I need and I just know, well, where to start. But at some point you get so used to certain references that you can traverse them by memory. I mean, I know certain folders by memory and I know exactly which references I want and what's connected to which thing. And if you plan on writing about that, then the spreadsheet will make your life very easy because you don't need to look for all the things. So that's my note.
Awesome. Did you want to add anything, Pauline, before we go to take some questions?
No, I think you said everything.
Awesome. Okay. So I see there's been a lot of chat that I have not been able to keep up with. But if anybody wants to like share some of their ideas or an experience they've had in the archive or ask questions, feel free to raise your hand and let us know that you want to share something, and we can do that. And so while we are seeing if anybody wants to do that, so in the chat, so I see that quote needs to be on merch about spreadsheets. I totally agree, and I think that might be happening. So I also see, so A4 notebooks rule. Does somebody want to share like how they're using A4 notebooks? Because I am not familiar with A4 notebooks. Anybody? Nobody? Can raise your hand and unmute yourself?
It's a jumbled mess, Chantel. Numerous notebooks that I scribble in that I need to organize myself, and I'm so impressed with your spreadsheets.
Oh, nice. So were you saying it's the A4 notebooks that are a mess?
Increasingly, yeah.
Awesome.
And my organization of them.
Ah, awesome. Yeah.
I totally get that. I have like a pile of papers from my time in Halifax, and the other day I needed one paper and I had to go over the pile. I should have written down that because, well, it gets messy very quickly.
Oh, yeah. I saw, okay, so Natalie has said, so back up your work on another device if you aren't using cloud. So yes, absolutely. And then if you aren't using cloud but need help, definitely reach out, because that will save you so many headaches. Because obviously if you do have a backup, that's fine as long as you're backing up. But the really cool part of a lot of these tools when it comes to the office tools or Google, and of course there's even more out there, is that you can use them across devices and use the collaboration features. So, you know, whether you might be on your phone or your computer, if you're using one of these collaboration services and using cloud storage, it makes your life so much easier for keeping track of everything and being able to share things and things like that. Oh yes, handwriting is good for retention. I love that. But now, because I have stopped handwriting for so long, I can't really read mine. So I've kind of given up. Okay.
Do we need to decode your notes? I mean, we have code breakers now.
It might, yeah, actually. Yeah, or I'll just spend my time like trying to learn and handwriting, which I have not done. So yeah, so I do not do any of the code breaking because I can't read Ann Lister's handwriting, which I know a lot of people say that as well, which is fine because there is so much stuff out there to research that you will never run out of something. So don't feel like if you're not code breaking or you're not, you know, in there trying to read her stuff that you don't have anything to offer, because everything that the code breakers find, in fact, I piggyback off them. So they provide transcriptions in their blogs, and then I'm like, oh yes, I just found some information, and those are the keywords that I then use to go explore the archives for all of that additional stuff. Yes, I see Louise Ann Lister's plain hand broke me. I can imagine. That's why I didn't even try. Question from Patricia. Patricia, did you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Yes. Yes, I see in all the copyright protections that you're not allowed to share what you retrieve with anyone. So how do you, I mean, are you really using this only for your own?
Oh, you kind of cut out, but I think was your last question like,
or how do you share your gems, or how do all your fans access what some of your discoveries are, since you can't share it?
Yeah, so what I did, because when I first started, I went straight to the Mariana letter. So that's kind of like one of the areas that inspired me to start doing more research. And so that I was lucky enough to go to the actual archives in Halifax, and I took pictures of all of the letters. And so when I got back home, I took some time to transcribe Mariana's letters. So while I can't actually share images of her letters, because everybody would have to order the copies themselves, I can share the transcriptions. And so what I decided to do was create a blog, which I think almost all the code breakers have blogs as well, where they'll transcribe it into text and then just share the actual the words from these transcriptions. And so doing that with the letters, and then the actual, so like if I found wills and all sorts of that kind of stuff, like if you transcribe it and turn it into your own text, you can share that. You just can't share the actual images of these items that you're requesting unless you get explicit permission. So does that help answer your question?
Just
And then, yeah, Marlene.
Just a note here, if you want to publish a book, for example, you have to ask for specific permissions from the archives you got the material. So please keep that in mind if you want to write.
Oh, I don't know if anybody else, I lost you, Marlene. But yeah, to go off of what she was saying, like if you are doing it definitely if you're doing it for commercial purposes, you do have to get permission, and that usually comes with additional costs. Or I think it always comes with additional costs when it's commercial. But sometimes you can request specific permission for non-commercial uses. But for me, I just transcribe what I can, and then I'll like do write-ups on my blog to provide some more background information. I see some questions about like other things, like, so when it comes to any other copyright rules, I do not know like all of those. I just know from my experience with ordering stuff from the archives. So like Google Books and all of those kinds of copyright rules, I do not know. I just know when it comes to the archive information, what you have to agree to. Yes, thank you, Deborah. In fact, that was one of the biggest things we wanted to cover. So there could be a whole day just on copyright, especially in this whole world that we're in with all of the information that we're finding. There are copyright rules for everything, and then multiple levels of copyright rules. And so, yes, it can get very hairy. But like comes up a lot, one of the best ways is to just err on the side of caution. If you're not sure, don't share it. If you're not sure, don't. When you're not sure, don't do it. And then maybe reach out to the archives. Okay, if I missed something, because that chat is moving fast. Is there anybody else? I know we're coming up at the end. Is there anybody else who wants to maybe share some archive stories or anything like that? They can come off mute and go ahead.
Hi, Chantel, it's me again. I think what surprised me when I was looking in York and North Yorkshire archives, not the Borthwick, I think the Borthwick's really well organised, it's just the sheer volume of archives that aren't fully catalogued. And in North Yorkshire in particular, I was trying to find the asylum records for Anne Walker and Eliza Rain. How many of those, you realise that volunteers are still trying to catalogue these. And so you're then very reliant on the archivist and their knowledge of some of the papers that exist. So, they would just bring out random groups of papers, and in some of those there'd be real gems. And it's just, I don't know, I suppose I was really struck by the scale of the archives and how much of it is still not fully catalogued, and that a lot of them still don't understand actually what they've got in their collections. But that's why we do it, isn't it? That's why it's exciting.
Yes. In fact, that's one of the main things that got me excited about creating my blog, was that there are so many of these archives that literally have boxes of documents sitting on shelves that they just don't have the resources to be able to catalog. And so there is a plethora of information out there for us to find. It's all about supporting the archives because they need the support. So, make sure that when you're ordering stuff, you're following their copyrights, pay them, help them out, donate, whatever, because the archives are where all of our stuff is at, and we're going to find some amazing things.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if that Let's see, I don't see any other hands. Any last minute? We got 3 minutes if anybody wants to do any archive shares. Okay. So yeah, okay, well, thanks everybody for coming to the archive section. This is just, you know, a small bit of this world that's out there. So hopefully we can all catch back up in the water closet and talk more about it. Bye, everybody.